So, Jim, first of all, welcome to Small Business Australia's Business Advantage. And if we could kick off by just learning a little bit about the very early days of Jim getting started with, the business as it was all those years ago.
Well, it wasn't part of my plan, Bill. Not at all. I went to university, started in 1971 to basically try and understand the reason for the rise and fall of civilizations. So I did a BA and I did a PhD, which in the end, stretching it out, took me 10 years. And I came up with what I thought was the proper explanation. And I had absolutely no prospect of any kind of job. I was supposed to be trained as a historian. Nobody wants a historian who is a huge non-specialist. So basically all that happened is that I had a part-time business, which was my lawn mowing business, which I used to do as a way of getting exercise and money during my doctorate, and I made it into a full-time job. That started in 1982 in December. And yes, just temporarily until something better came along, you might say, and I'm still stuck with it.
And so, Jim, you needed to get some exercise and make a few dollars. How did, right at the beginning then, did you get your first customers when you were a startup, as they say today, looking to earn some part-time money? How'd you go get your first customers?
Well, leaflets originally. I mean, the first thing I started back in 1970, I took a gap year and I put a notice about that big in the local hardware store offering to do work, so gardening work. And I got a couple of customers, which I kept for a couple of years. And then after a while, I decided that I started putting leaflets around the place, and I was charging $3 an hour back in those days, which I thought was pretty good, but it was double what I was charging my other customers. I had no idea about what to charge anybody. And after a while, what happened is as so much of my life, it was driven by girls. I thought that if I had a car, I might have more success with women than I had in the past, which wasn't very much. So therefore, to pay for that, I decided I needed to actually do something a bit more lucrative. So I thought, what if I get a lawnmower and I can then charge by the job instead of by the hour? So I had this campaign that said most lawns $5. And, so if you do a lawn $5, you can do it in about half an hour. So that's potentially $10 an hour, which was an awful lot in those days. I mean, I bought my first house for $30,000, so it wasn't bad money at all. So it was much better money than you could possibly make doing any other kind of job. And it was outside and it was in my own business and fresh air and exercise. And so it was a good business. I liked it. I've always loved that, being outside. Actually, still, it might have some crack on my head. I've been up at my farm planting bunya nuts. And I ran myself into branches. I still love working outside. It's just fun.
Well, I think it's interesting that you literally, put a sign up at the local hardware store and then effectively, did some letterbox dropping in the sort of local neighborhood, because, in many respects now we hear about digital marketing and social media marketing, all of those sorts of things. And some of those are very practical. Where's the target market? Where might they see it? Let's get the basic message there. They're not done very often anymore these days, which means the letterboxes are uncluttered. But if that's where your customers are, letting them know that you exist and you can offer a service for them could possibly still be super effective today.
I wouldn't recommend it. We've tried it. We try leafleting even with our brand today, and it has very little effect. You really got to be online. But there's all kinds of systems, like have your local Facebook page, which is buy, swap, sell, or just different kinds of local kinds of technology. Social media work quite well. It's not that difficult to do, but you have to go online. Look, it used to be simple in the old days. It was leaflets, then it was local papers and yellow pages, and that was it. I mean, that was marketing. These days, all of that's gone. None of it's relevant. It's all social media, Google AdWords. It's immensely complicated, and it changes from day to day. So we look back on the old days, and it was so simple in those days.
Yeah. Well, I think I think when you're talking about the buy, swap, and sell type Facebook groups as an example, it's almost like that's a digital community notice board to some degree. And so the modern day version of whacking something up in the hardware store, it doesn't really help you if you're buying most of your hardware online from Bunnings, but that digital community notice board is sort of the equivalent to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely right. And you've got to get yourself, you can set up a local Google My Business page, and you've got to promote it. Actually, you've got to actually go in there and get people to put reviews on and stuff. And once you get a few reviews in, somebody says, well, let's say if you've got a cleaning business in the area of Doncaster, then you just put, you appear on that page. And if you've got a few star ratings, it's not difficult to get work. So you have to know how to do it, but it's not that complicated, really.
And so, Jim, you started off, you liked girls as a young man. Reckon a flash car might help. Going to have to get some money to get the flash car.
It was the king.
I can charge by the job.
But yes, okay.
Yep.
I completely bummed out in that way. It didn't do me any good at all, I have to say.
Okay.
Total failure from that point of view.
Can you share with us, Jim's group today was not envisaged back then when you were starting out, but tell us just a little bit about Jim's group today.
Well, what happened was, look, I finished, I was mowing full time, basically from 1982. I started pretty quickly getting as much work as I could handle, putting on subcontractors, which wasn't great service. And then I switched to building up and selling lawn mowing rounds, which was better, but still, very, very limited. And then a company called VIP came in from Adelaide, and they were a franchise lawn mowing company, which I didn't even think was possible, but they did. And they came in and they had like 250 franchisees, which really frightened me because I had about 10 subbies. And I was building up and selling. I actually rang up the state manager and said to him, look, I'm Jim from Jim's Mowing, which was called Jim's Mowing in those days. And I said, look, I really don't want to compete with you guys. What if I just help to build VIP and I give you all my customers and stuff and help to build you up? And he said, no, thanks. So I thought I just thought I better try and find out what these guys were doing, if there's any possible way to survive against them, because they scared me. So I went to the franchising expo that year, which was 1988. In the old exhibition buildings, and I just went to the store and the stands and said, look, tell me about your system. I'm very interested. Not telling them why I was interested. And he gave me this brochure and spent 15 minutes telling me about VIP, and then the state manager came in and kicked me off the stand. Said, that's Jim Penman, don't tell him anything else. But I looked at it and I thought, well, there's sense to this. I can see a reason why a person would want to come into a franchise system, but I reckon maybe I could do something even more attractive to franchisees. That was my idea. I thought if I can make it attractive to franchisees. So I looked at all the things people didn't like about franchising, and I developed a contract. It took me 9 months arguing with lawyers to develop a contract that was very, very franchisee focused. Like, we actually forbid ourselves the right to take customers from a franchisee. So if you put a new franchise customer in an area, rather than saying, okay, now this new guy started, you got to give me your regulars. We said, no, we can't do that. We can buy them off you at your price if you want to sell them. We gave them a right of renewal. We gave them the right to say, we're not going to force you to buy anything from us. A lot of things. And with time, we actually put more stuff on. We give the right to change franchisors, to vote out your franchisors, veto changes to your own manual, all kinds of things. So the idea was to put a system together that would be extremely attractive to franchisees. And I didn't really think much of it. When I first started off, somebody said to me, what do you think you could achieve by this thing? And I say, well, if it goes really well, maybe one day I could have 100 franchisees. We're now 4,640 odd, counting and rising. So it worked out rather better than I thought.
So I'd just like to explore that. Like, so you're 4,600, and of course it was Jim's Mowing, initially. So you had the picture of you with the bucket hat. I think there was a bit more. I think it was dark coloured hair, and some of it was on the face, Jim. If I remember.
Yeah, I had a beard. That's all to do with women too. I'll tell you that story if you like. Growing it and taking it off, all women.
Well, you may have been well before your time, because we're based in Fitzroy, which is the hipster centre of Melbourne. There's a lot of young men with beards, with some very attractive women walking around. So you may have had something back then, Jim. But 4,600 is an enormous number of franchisees. Now, they're not all mowing lawn these days. Can you tell us a bit more about, how it's broadened out?
Well, look, so much of my business career, Bill, is me being stupid and not understanding things. When I first started out, we had this mowing system. It was purely Jim's Mowing. And I thought, okay, let's do cleaning, because our contracts could work for cleaning just as well. They're very similar systems. But I thought nobody's going to want to buy a business or have somebody come and clean their house who looks like this guy with the beard and the hat. That's a gardening image, obviously, isn't it? This is what I looked like when I was mowing lawns. I used to wear a bucket hat because it kept me free from the sun, but it also didn't get knocked off going under branches. That's the reason that there's a bucket hat on it. So I thought, well, obviously that's not going to work. So I developed a new brand called Sunlight, Sunlit, and I had all these little sprays and things done from it. And I sold a couple of franchises, but I couldn't get any work. It just didn't work. So eventually I gave them the money back and said, look, this isn't working, guys. And then sometime later, somebody came to me and said, well, what about doing Jim's cleaning? And I said, well, that's not going to work because Jim's is a mowing, gardening image. How would it apply to a woman, for heaven's sake, if she was doing cleaning? So I said, it won't work. And they said, it will work. And I said, it won't work. And they said, we're so convinced it'll work that we'll give it a try ourselves. So I said, look, okay, all right, have a go. So they did, and it worked. So somebody would go into somebody like a real estate agent and they say, we're from Jim's cleaning. And so, oh, Jim's got like the moment. Oh, yeah, okay, we'll give you a try. So somehow the brand spread to more than one thing. And most of the ways that new division started, it wasn't because we thought of it. Somebody come to us and said, I'd like to try Jim's, handyman, or Jim's dog wash, or Jim's test and tag, or Jim's pest control, or Jim's conveyancing, or all these things. People coming to us. That's mostly how divisions start.
So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into this because Jim's now is a very well-known brand, and it has what the marketing professors call brand equity. There's a lot of value in Jim's brand itself, Jim's group. But back in those early days when it started off, basically cutting the grass and looking after people's lawns and things, what was it about the way you went about sort of marketing and selling that people would buy your service? And what was it about the way you delivered your service that enabled you to get more customers?
Okay, where it really begins and ends is customer service. We're actually, look, I'm not no great shakes at marketing, but I'm fanatical about service. When I was a lawn mowing contractor, I was really, really, really intense on doing the best possible job. I was one of the first contractors in Australia to have a brush cutter because it used to frustrate me. I couldn't do all the edges perfectly. Every blade of grass has to be off, has to be done. I have to do it on time. I just have an emotional, really, really extreme attitude. Even today, I actually personally read every poor review that comes into Jim's Group, every single one. And there are thousands and thousands a year. Every single one I read and do something about. So when I started, basically, I wanted a system that would be so great for franchisees that I could demand they give great service. So we devised certain things in the contract. And as soon as I franchised and people owned their own business, they gave much better service than my subcontractors ever had. And then with time, we started putting in more and more stuff into place. Like, for example, we started recording complaints and then having systems which were automated to follow up complaints. And we have systems to make sure the jobs only go to franchisees who want them. It used to be right up on the blackboard originally, and then we automated it. And then later on, we put surveys in place and worked out different ways of dealing with that. And as we've done that, the level of complaints went down and down and down. Like, for example, pre-franchise, about half the messages that came into my office were complaints, and the other half were new jobs. All right, it was bad. After a few years, we started monitoring complaints. It was down to about 5% of all stuff coming in, that all clients would be complaints. And then as time went on, as we dropped and dropped and dropped that, put better systems in place, now it's like well under 1%. And over the next year, we've got some software systems coming into place that I'm confident will drop that by at least half again. So, and as we've done that, what we've found is that it's become incredibly easy to find work because reputation, word of mouth, repeat customers have become so important. And just to give you an example, back in the 90s, I would have teams of canvassers knocking on doors to try and find work for my mowing contractors. It was a really, really hard thing to find work. As time gone, it's got easier and easier and easier. Last year, we knocked back 42% of all leads coming in, and we've dropped our advertising in recent years. In fact, we've given back more than $1 million to our franchisees from their advertising contribution because we can't spend it because so many divisions are so busy year round. Like fencing, for example, is about 60% unserviced. We just cannot cope with the demand. So my view of marketing is this: you've got to be out there and you've got to market, but really what counts is how good your service is. And if your service is absolutely brilliant and it's better and better and better, then it's extraordinarily easy to find work.
I want to talk a little bit more about, service, because you're saying it's absolutely critical. And it's one of those concepts I hear, like value added, like jargon gets thrown around. But then you sort of say, well, let's peel back a few layers of the onion as to what do we really mean by customer service? Can you share with us, the 2 or 3 key ingredients of what makes gym, when you deal with gyms, what makes the service great?
Well, we have very strict requirements in place. First of all, when you get a lead from a client, it always comes through as a lead. You've got 2 hours to contact the client. Now, ideally 2 minutes. You really should get back very, very fast. The customer contacts us, rings us, or these days online. You've got to get back to them as soon as possible. You make an appointment. Now, if you can't get through, you send a text to say you tried to ring. Okay, because people often don't recognize phone numbers. So you ring. If you can't get through, you text, "Hi, this is Bill from Jim's Cleaning. Tried to ring just now. Please call me back on." So you get double chance. When you get through to that client, you make an appointment. You always make it 2 hours. You never make it less than 2 hours time scale, because if you say 10 o'clock, you cannot be guaranteed to be on there on time. So it's got to be 9 and 11. If you can't make it, you ring the client. If you can't get through to the client, you text them. If you turn up and they're not there, you ring them and then you text them. And then you give a quote. And if you email the quote, you text the quote. This doesn't always happen, but this is what's supposed to happen. You make sure the customer is happy. Make sure the customer is happy. If they're not happy, like if they get a survey back, then you go back to them and say, "What can I do? How can I fix it? What can I do to make it right?" We just go back again and again and again, thousands of times a year. Customers are happy. You've got to satisfy that customer. So it's just that fanaticism. And then we put really heavy pressure on our franchisees to do exactly that. We have a system called lead fees, by the way, too. So when we charge fees, we have a base fee, plus we have a small fee for every lead provided. Now, what that means is that they still pay for the lead, even if they don't actually get the job, which means there's an incentive to keep on trying with the customer and trying to convert them. And we found that by doing that, we actually increased the actual conversion rate dramatically. We got about 50% more actual jobs coming out of the same number of leads, because the incentive is there to chase them up. We think about 75% of all leads to jobs, which is remarkably high, particularly because we are actually stressed. We are not the cheapest. We actually tell our franchisees to charge well.
What I'm hearing there on that, so the leads coming in is responsiveness is critical. And the quicker you can respond, someone's putting their hand up and saying, "I'm interested in potentially doing business with you," the quicker you can be there and respond. And if they don't answer the phone because you're an unknown number, using the other communication method, we're sending a text, you've got the mobile number, they've left that on a form online, or they've left it via the phone call. So the responsiveness is a theme to ideally win the contract. Then the reliability of setting the expectations appropriately, 2 hours, not 1 hour, but reliably meeting those expectations. And if you can't, continuing to communicate, to continue to set the expectation with the customers and deliver against them every step of the way.
About 90% of complaints are not about quality of work. They're about timing issues, not ringing back, not turning up, those kind of, not sending a quote, this kind of thing. Look, just to give you an example of how much timing matters. We did a survey once. We survey everything. We're always surveying everything. We survey franchisees, survey clients. We did a survey once where we actually looked at the conversion rate as against when the franchisee got back to the client. We found that when a franchisee didn't get back to the client within the 2 hours, the conversion rate was less than half. When they got back within the first 2 hours, but after the first 10 minutes, it leaped to 78%. But when, as reported by the client, they got back within the first 10 minutes, it leaped to 85%. So you're almost doubling your conversion rate depending on when you get back. And the problem that people have in business is they think it's about price. That's actually the mug's game. You do not compete on price, compete on service. You can be really expensive. Like, we recommend our franchisees work on at least $60 an hour. And there are people out there who will not work for less than $120 an hour. Well, I know one particular guy started a pool care business in his first year. He did $500,000 just by himself. So you can make very, very good money, but your service has got to be amazing. And what I actually tell people too, in our franchisee induction training, the first 2 hours I give the talk, because I'm the owner, I can talk whatever I like. And most of it's about customer service. And I say, the thing is, what you could do, and I get them to, what do you want from the client? You've got to satisfy the client, what they need, what they want. But just satisfying is not enough. What you really want is, wow, that's fantastic. And I can remember a client saying to me, I've never knew my lawn could look that good. People would say that, and I would do a job better. I used to mow the front lawn. I'd use a brush cutter to edge the front and the back. And then as I was coming down, I'd keep it running, and I'd get the grass from the cracks in the driveway and blow it off. And I cut back to the edges to the nature strip, so that they didn't even know there was concrete under there, but I cut it back and I'd show them. And people would get me to go once only, but the job was so great and the service was so good, I get it as a regular client.
Yeah, look, that makes a lot of sense to me, Jim, particularly if I'm the customer and I've got a problem, I need this service delivered and I don't have a lot of time, but I've got to try and find someone to get me a quote or see when they can come around and have a look at it or do whatever. And whoever can get to me while I'm trying to solve that problem as quickly as possible and potentially make that appointment, I'm not even going to ring anyone else or look around. Like, that's the first one in. That person's also then going to be able to set my expectations about what's appropriate in terms of the complexity of the job and therefore what it's going to cost, etc. So that what your research showed you around, get to them in those first couple of minutes if you can, or the first 10 minutes versus after 2 hours, makes perfect sense for around what that problem is that the customer's actually got. The other thing that really resonates with me is what you said around with your franchisees. You're sort of also charging them for the leads that you give them. And therefore, because they're having to pay based on the volume of those leads, they better well follow them up and convert them because it's costing them money. So there's actually some pain for them. The incentives are structured the right way, as opposed to, well, I just get that as part of my franchise fee. And if I can't be bothered this week, I'm busy enough this week, I don't care. And that impacts the Jim's brand because you've distributed the lead to them. That customer is waiting to hear from someone, and here's someone who's not motivated to do anything about it.
Well, yeah, these days they care very much about things like surveys and complaints too. I just had a call just this morning. I mean, one of the things I do is I delete complaints if a person's got evidence. And there was one particular case where a franchisee got a complaint, and they dealt with it really well, and they fixed it up, and the client was made happy. So I erased their I raised the complaint and the bad survey, and they're now 5.0, which is absolute maximum. And I said, just congratulations on such a brilliant record. And so he wrote back to me and said, thank you, Jim, you've made my day. But I'm the CEO of the company, but I will congratulate individual franchisees on things like that. We have a very, we're fanatical about customer service. So actually the interesting thing is, in actual fact, our main customers, not actually the people out there getting their lawns mowed. It's actually my franchisees. And actually, bottom of my email, if you saw it when I emailed you, there's a little triplet that goes out. First priority is the welfare of our franchisees. We are also passionate about customer service. We sign only franchisees and franchisors. We are convinced we'll succeed. So my primary customers are actually my franchisees.
Look, and again, that resonates with me. Jim, many years ago, I developed a little framework and wrote a book called Scores on the Board, and we talked about an ecosystem in terms of, successful, sustainable businesses. And the ECO was employees, customers, and then owners. And that by serving the employees well and helping them do as well as they could do, they would deliver great service to the customers and great value to the customers. And we could generate a profit from them and referrals. And this ecosystem then fed on itself, because as the business grows, the owner can reinvest then in other opportunities for the employees to train them. The business gets a bit bigger. Maybe they can move from the front line or the call center to a management position. So growing businesses, and of course, our theme today is ingredients for building a successful business. Really, a business that's not growing can't continue to meet the needs of the employees, in your case, the franchisees, and you've got the national office employees, of course, the customers they serve, and then ultimately say you as the owner or me as the owner of my businesses and the owners that are listening today. So that employee, customer, owner, or franchisees first, customer service gets delivered by them, very important, but without those franchisees coming first. We've got some people listening that have not been involved in franchising, and people talk about the systems and the franchise agreements. And when they think about franchising their own business, they've got to get a franchise consultant. Can you just talk us through some of the typical components in a franchise system and agreement, and then the differences that you've innovated with?
Well, a franchise agreement is basically a contract. It's fairly carefully governed by the government these days. You've got to have a disclosure document and stuff, which is a matter of rubbish. Nobody ever reads them. It's just nonsense. The only good thing about the code of contacts is it does say that you have to give a list of all your current franchisees with contact numbers, because that's an important thing. If you're going to research a franchise, you should, and I've always done that right from back in 1989 when I first started. I've always given potential franchisees a list of all my franchisees, because that's how you research it. But then you have an operating system. We have a manual, which isn't that long actually. The franchisee manual is about 15 pages, which just shows you how you're supposed to do with customers and so forth. And then it's things like how you can sell your business and what levels of service you need to offer, and yeah, it just governs the whole thing. Our contracts aren't complicated really. They're pretty basic, but you know, as I said, the manual is not complicated. If you were at McDonald's, you'd have a stack that high. Ours is 15 pages. It's quite small, but it's very, very fanatical about things like customer service.
Now, you and I were having a brief chat before we kicked off the webinar today, and we were talking about this, should everyone get involved in franchising if they want to have their own business? And you said to me, oh, well, not necessarily. That's something we should talk about. Can you share with everyone what makes a good franchisee and where it is a good fit versus perhaps being an independent business operator is better for some people?
Okay, look, certain people do very well as franchisees, people who've been used to working within a structured environment but showing initiative. Now, someone like an Army trained person, like Army NCO, Army officer, someone who's been a bank manager, those kind of people tend to do very, very well because they're used to taking responsibility, but within a structure. There's certain kinds of people that are just too independently minded. They just do not want to be told what to do. And look, I have to be honest, I would not be a good franchisee. I'm wildly individualistic. I want to do things in my own way. I'm not going to be happy working with somebody else's system at all. And there's people like that around. Also, a franchise system like ours actually puts a lot of pressure on people. I get accused of causing mental illness because of the fact of the complaint system and the surveys. And there's a lot of strain in this. People are very, very concerned about more surveys in gyms. It's huge. And people get very depressed and very anxious about it, which is why I personally get involved in knocking them off. If there's anything to show that they're not fair or if the problem's been fixed, I'll delete them. I delete probably, 15, 20 complaints a day for those kinds of reasons. But it can be very, very stressful to be part of a system with very high standards. And if the system doesn't have high standards, it's not worth anything because it's the high standards that make it valuable. So that's the negative. That's the downside, and you have to pay for it. What's the upside? Well, it's very simple, okay? And you can base it on statistics. If you go online and you look at success rate of people in businesses like cleaning or mowing lawns, and don't believe me, just look it up for yourself. Your actual chance of being in business at the end of 12 months is between 5 and 10%. The vast majority fail. Now, sometimes they fail for lack of training, but also they fail because it's just too difficult to get going. Now, our figure is around 12%, and that 12% have actually failed. So 88% of people who sign with us will still be there in a year's time. And the 12% who go isn't always because they fail. Sometimes they do tend to have poor levels of customer service, but they also have other reasons. They could have health or got offered a great job or need to move, whatever. So our failure rate is a tiny fraction. And we found even things like when we used to run about 1 in 6 failed in the first year, about 17%. And as soon as we put our proper training course in place, that dropped immediately by about 1/3. So even the way you train them, we spend 3 days in the office and they go through everything, myself on customer service, franchisee rights, bookkeeping, all kinds of things. And then we provide ongoing support. Somebody rings them at least a month, monthly, ideally weekly. There's meetings that are held about every 6 weeks, which they really expected to come to. If they've got any problems, they ring their franchisor and they get a response. They can contact me if they wish to. Every franchisee gets my direct phone number and email address. So there's a whole system of support that's involved in helping a person to become successful. So statistically speaking, yes, franchising is a very, very good alternative to business for yourself, but only if you've got the sort of person who can work within a structured environment.
Yeah, I often hear the phrase that the great franchise systems like Jim's Group and its franchise systems, you are in business for yourself, but you're not by yourself. But if you're really that, as you say, individualistic, want to do things your way, always got a better way, et cetera, following a proven system that will deliver the results may not satisfy you. And you may come up with something that may be better for you, but that drive around, I'm going to do it my way, it's not going to work within being in a proven system that good franchisors have got.
But then again, what you can do too is you can always go into a system like ours and you can learn the ropes and then go and do it yourself. We actually, you mentioned before how a person wanted to get, if they wanted to actually become a franchisor and start their own business, I can tell you the best thing to do is to come to us and say, I'd like to become a Jim's franchisor. We'll actually put you through all the training, the franchisee training, the franchisor training. We'll show you how to do it. And if you want to then, one not too long ago, somebody actually rang me, one who's been through all the franchisee and the franchisor training, and said, "Oh, Jim, just wanted to congratulate me. I've just signed my first franchisee." And I said, "I didn't think you'd actually join us." He said, "No, I didn't. I started my own." But I applied unless you taught me. And it cost her, maybe $2,500. She got the best training in the world for the most successful company in the country.
Can you tell us just a bit more, like, if we've got someone, who's listening today, watching a recording, and they go, I've often thought about, I want to take my social media marketing service that I currently provide and turn it into a franchising type model. What would they do, Jim? How do they come along to Jim's group in terms of approaching you? And then if it all makes sense from your point of view, how does it all work?
Well, they can email me, jim@jims.net, or you can get that off the website, which is www.jims.net. So they email me and we'll book them in for training. People just sometimes do training without even any particular division involved. That's how almost everybody starts. And they come along and they have a look at it, and we'll go through it with them. And to be pretty honest, most people who go through our system actually end up becoming part of us, because what we've got to offer is so overwhelmingly, when you look at all the technology, we spend about $5 million a year on technology. We're huge investors in that, and the amount of thought and effort and the complexity of the systems and the power of them is quite extraordinary. So when they see all that, they do tend to get sucked in. So we offer it freely. We don't actually have any. There's no confidentiality statements with us. We just teach everybody everything, all of our trade secrets. I'll tell anybody anything about my business at all, because in effect it works pretty well, because I know what I've got is good, and people tend to be convinced by that.
So, just reflecting on your journey, as a business owner and a business builder, can you share with us, a couple of the biggest sort of learning experiences that you've had along the way? So, mistakes have been made and you really learnt something out of that mistake.
Okay. I could talk about so many mistakes. Look, let's go back to the early stages, pre-franchised, when I was trying to sell lawn mowing rounds. And one of the things that about me is I have an incredibly poor, personal skills. I've been divorced 3 times, mostly because women couldn't stand to live with me. And my wife has been married to me for 21 years now, which is really successful. But to cope with me, she has to actually think I've got mild Asperger's or something like that, because I'm so socially inept. So here am I, have this business, building up lawn mowing grounds, trying to sell them to get going. And I was terrible at sales. I was really, really, really bad at selling. I was hopeless at it. I just couldn't talk to people. I didn't know what to say. I tried a method. I used to actually, at one stage, I employed a professional salesperson who would sit and try and sell my own lawn mowing business to somebody else while I was sitting in the same room, which was stupid. And people kept on telling me you should sell your own business. And I said, I can't, I'm inept. And then I learned to sell lawn mowing businesses, which I always thought was the key lesson of my entire business life. When I went to see somebody in my church who was in the advertising industry, was an advertising agent, very successful, far more than me in those days. And I felt very intimidated. But I went, he just very nicely invited me into his office after I was waiting for a while in the empty room. And for half an hour, he just told me about advertising. He told me about how to advertise, where to advertise, what systems to use, how to assess it. Everything he knew through all his career as an advertising executive, owning his own business. He just gave to me. And then at the end of it, he said, Jim, you don't need an advertising agent. Just go and do what I've advised you. And I walked out of that office and I knew that if I ever needed an advertising agency, I would go straight back to him. And I was walking back to the car, which was parked some streets away. And I was thinking about this. And I was thinking, because I had this problem with sell. How do you sell? How do you sell? And I couldn't sell. And I thought, what has this guy done? What has Peter done? He's actually told me nothing about his business, and yet he's totally sold me on his business. So how has he done it? This is magic. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, what happened is the only concern he had was my welfare and the welfare of my business. And by doing that, he completely sold me on his business. And then later on, when I wanted to do advertising on TV after his franchise, I actually went straight back to him. I had no idea what he charged, nothing. I knew I was going to use him. Now, I can actually remember the stage. I can remember going back to my car, which was my really battered Kingswood. It was, you wouldn't believe how bad it was. It was filthy. I never locked it. It had dents in it. The back sail ripped out to put more rubbish in. It was really the worst you could possibly imagine. I can remember reaching out to the door handle, and I thought, I wonder if this could possibly work for selling lawn mowing rounds. So the next time somebody rang me about a lawn mowing business, instead of talking about the business, I asked him a question. I said, Tommy, do you know what the cut of a lawn mowing round means? Now, the cut is each job done once. You've got 50 customers worth $60 each. That's a $3,000 cut. And anybody in the industry knows what that means in terms of income. You can calculate it based on average frequency and extras and all kinds of things. But people who were inquiring about lawn mowing rounds, which was in the age in those days, didn't know what cut meant. So I explained it. Then I start talking about the business. I talk about how to succeed, how to advertise, how to promote it, what to charge, what sort of equipment. And as he came to see me, I just gave him more information about how to be successful in business. And at the end of it, I just gave him there's some customers in your area. That's my sales pitch. A little while later, somebody rang me, had the most interesting conversation of my life. Somebody said to me, Jim, they'd been to see me in the past, and they said, I want your advice. I said, well, how can I help you? And he said, well, look, I've been offered a business in my area, a lawn mowing business, and I want you to advise me, which is the better business, that one or yours? And that's interesting, because I'm doing this to try and get people to buy my businesses. But he's asking me to recommend against my business. But I thought, well, it's got to have integrity. So I asked him the questions. I said, okay, how many customers? How far apart are they? What's the cut? How long has he had it for? Why is he leaving? What's he going to do? These are all relevant questions if you want to value your business. And I said to him, that's a better business by that one. Got asked the same question 3 times in quick succession. Each time I gave away the sale. Each time I told them to go to buy the other one. And they all came back and bought from me. And from that one day, when I learned that session, I never, ever had any trouble selling lawn mowing rounds. And that's when I got to the process of telling people about so I would actually, whenever a person bought a lawn mowing round off me, I'd write their name and their phone number in black text on a little white card, and I'd stick it behind me on the wall. And eventually I had about 100. And if anybody interested in buying from me, I'd say, ring anybody. Just ring anybody. And they'll all say the same thing. Jim was great to deal with. He looked after me. He replaced jobs without question. He always gives advice. He's invited us to free lunches, all kinds of things. And then when I started franchising, it was the same thing. I was starting up against a company that was far more successful, far more money, far more experienced. And and they'd come to me, and I'd be running it from my basement or whatever. It was very at home, very crude. And they'd say, well, why would I buy from you when VIP is so much more successful? And I say, okay, here's a list of all my current franchises with their phone numbers. I want you to ring them, all of them. And then I want you to go to VIP and get their list and ring them, because I knew they wouldn't give them a list. And that's what sold my businesses. Now, I started off thinking maybe I'd have 100. I had like 60 in my first year. And it was that principle. I looked after my franchisees so well, and I used them. It's the same as customers. Customers, franchisees, the same thing. If you can make people into raving fans, it's really, really easy to be successful. So somebody even as socially inept as me can somehow sell if you're genuinely interested in the welfare of the person you're dealing with. I had a call this morning where one particular prospective franchisee felt that they hadn't understood what the contract meant. And I said, look, if you don't understand what it meant, they hadn't started yet. I said, I will give you a free, you can have all your money back, all of it. No questions asked. It was actually the wife of a very successful franchisee who's concerned with this. And I said, I wrote him an email. And I said, doesn't matter for this cooling off period. If you decide not to go ahead with this because you didn't understand the system, it's all going back to you in writing from me, the CEO of the company. And I do that kind of thing all the time. You look to the interests of the person you're dealing with. And when you do that, you're successful.
I'm quite moved by that story, Jim, and for a number of reasons, but a couple of words have stood out for me, and it's around sort of intent. So like people, if I think about politicians, they're trying to sell us something, but is it actually good for us to actually understand what we need? And what you've said is, if your intent is to put the other person's interests first, which any good advisor, friend, ideally human being should be doing, whatever then happens will be the right thing based on that interaction. So intent and understanding that customer's situation, that franchisee situation, that friend situation is so important. And the other word is integrity, the other word starting with I, where what I've just heard is that you're very transparent and open. So, if someone else's offering is superior, you've said it's superior, but don't trust me. Just here are the people that have bought our franchises. Now, why wouldn't VIP provide the list of theirs? Because there'd be some where there were some issues and problems with them, where the relationship's not going well. But what that actually says is, well, they're not prepared to be open and transparent.
That's right. Yeah. One thing I said, they had these government inquiries as to how to improve franchising, and every year I said the same thing. You're going about the wrong way. You're putting more and more bureaucrats and more administration and these complex documents, which not even lawyers can read them. Actually, they're so complicated, these disclosure documents. I said there's one thing that you should do. Every franchisor in this country should actually pay to have their franchisees contacted by some trusted third party, and you make that available on a public website. If you did that, you would do 1,000 times more at no cost to the franchisees for ethical franchising than any you could possibly imagine. But they wouldn't even consider it. It's a tiny cost, but they'd rather spend millions of dollars going to lawyers and financial advisors, all of which is garbage, because whatever's in your contract doesn't make any difference. It's how you look after your people that matter. Your contract could be fantastic, but if you don't actually follow it, or if you breach it, well, how is that fair?
And we have a couple of key phrases at Small Business Australia when we're conducting research with the business community on what we need from government. And those are, we want to see things simpler, we want to see things fairer, and by definition, they'll be better. Yet we have time and time again in any number of areas of our lives, things becoming more complex and complicated by experts, increasingly unfair for those without the resources to be able to navigate it, and therefore much poorer rather than better in terms of the outcomes for the citizens, the business owners, or whoever. And I watched that whole process with the franchising code and the changes, more compliance, more extra cost on the top of running the operation as it is, as opposed to getting to the heart of, ensuring that people are more openly and honestly dealing with each other.
That's right.
I'd like to talk to you a bit about, many of our business owners tuning in have employees or they have subcontractors. So I know that you've got a national office where you have a team of employees that work there. In addition to, you've got franchisors overseeing a particular type of business or geographic area, the franchisees themselves, who then ultimately serve the customers of Jim's various services. I know that character is something that through your own PhD research you've uncovered as a very important driver of the overall civilization and quality of life of humanity. When it gets to the nitty-gritty of selecting people to work in gyms, can you share with us a bit about your process, what you've learned has worked over time around, so people say, look, I've just got to get some good people to work for me. I don't like using the word good, but people that will be effective. How do you unpack and get a sense of whether they've got the right attitude, character, how important knowledge and skills are, if at all?
I'd say we're not particularly good at selecting people. I've had a lot of problems, particularly at the senior level of my company, finding the right kinds of people. I'm not a great interviewer. I'm not a great We often get good people from people who've come up through the ranks, people who started off in the franchising system and then become part of national office or in the call center. We've got some wonderful, wonderful staff who've come up through the call center, been there for like a decade, and they've grown through that and they understand the system from the inside and we know their character. Often people come from recommendations, so the friends invite them. We try and make it a very attractive place to work. We do things like we get fruit for the staff because I like them to be healthy. So we put boxes of fruit around so they can eat that. We have Thursday lunches, which are all paid for by the company. We're setting up a squash, racquetball, gymnasium, heated swimming pool, partly for staff to use. And we just try and treat people fairly, try and promote from within, try and upskill so a person can start at one level. We had one young bloke who started just moving boxes around, basic administration, casual job. He's now one of our senior managers. Actually, that's Joel. You've had contact with. He started with a basic job. He's got no tertiary degrees or anything. He's just a good guy who's come up through the system. Another lady, Megan, who runs what we call Jim's Plus, one of our departments. She worked for me in another department originally, and then I gave her a pay rise, and she basically had tears in her eyes. Nobody had ever given her a pay rise ever in her whole life. She's now a really fantastic manager. She's one of the best managers you could imagine. She's just a single mother in her 40s. She's not, you wouldn't look at her and talk to her, but she's proved herself through the system. So trying to help people to come up and promote through the system is really the best way. I'd much rather try and promote somebody from within and retrain and upskill them than try and take somebody from the outside. And if you're talking about recruiting people, I would say number one thing is choose character, not experience. You may need certain aspects of character, but of experience, but character is far more important. I'd rather have a person who doesn't know very much, but has a great attitude than somebody who knows a lot.
And so, yeah, again, just reflecting on your own experience, Jim, where you have brought people into the business, some have worked out and some haven't. And I think you've just said yourself that, interviewing skills is not necessarily a core competence of yourself, but how do you go about trying to get a sense of, or getting a read on their character and their attitude when you are initially evaluating someone to come into the company?
Look, it's really difficult. I honestly speaking, I don't know. I would say we have exceptionally good junior and middle level staff at Jim's, very dedicated people on the whole, really great people. I think it's got a lot to do with the environment and the culture. I mean, people, a company that's just basically run so the boss can make money, and that's clearly all it's about, isn't going to inspire much staff commitment and loyalty, but a company that really cares about everybody, and that's not just staff, but franchisees and clients, particularly franchisees, and it does tend to engender loyalty, and it tends to build up a sort of a group culture that encourages people to perform. As to how you find somebody at the top level, I don't know. Look, the single most valuable person in the business right now is a guy called Rocky Alloy, who he was with the prison service and he came in as a franchisor, and somebody introduced him to a role in the business. And I don't even remember hiring him, quite frankly. But when he was there, he was just so good, and he just took on more and more responsibility. And he's amazing. He's an incredible guy, and he's being paid about double what he was when we hired him. So he's doing very well for himself and the business, and he'll do better still. So, but I ask myself, how do you find people like Rocky? Or my finance chief, a lady called Cynthia, she's just wonderful. She's amazing. And she's just started off doing accounts, but she's just proved herself, and she's becoming a increasingly skilled CFO. And she didn't have it in the beginning, but she's learning it, and she's incredibly loyal. She's actually far more concerned about spending money than I am. She's stingiest with my dollar you could possibly imagine. We just had a whole old gun to her head to get her set to pay rise, for heaven's sake. No, you can't afford that. And I said, yes, we can. You're worth it. You have to accept it. We're not going to say, really, you imagine having an argument with a staff member who doesn't want to be paid more.
I think we'd love to get her working in the Victorian government, Jim. Actually delivering results and not wanting to be paid more money, as opposed to not delivering results and having pay rises.
Well, Cynthia's pretty unusual, I've got to say.
So Jim, I've got a really good sense of, the way you've built this culture, the processes and systems. My grandfather used to have this saying around, that the best fertilizer, in a farm is the farmer's shadow. And I get the sense, your name's on the company and you are the farmer, with respect to the business. One area which many business owners are struggling with, and I think you've mentioned you spend $5 million a year on it, is information technology and digital related things, which undoubtedly underpin a lot of the processes and systematic approaches to the way the business works. It's an area that, again, is, if we think media and marketing has changed a lot from letterbox drops and putting a sign on a notice board. Back then there weren't any PCs. We think about today and all the different options that are available and things coming at business owners on the IT, cyber, digital side of things. What advice would you have out there for someone running their own business with a few employees on just navigating this IT area?
It's not easy. I've made the most appalling mistake not too long ago, where keeping a person in place in a senior role, which I should never have done, and it was only just after a long time that I realised what a mistake it was, and it's cost us millions to fix the problem. So it's incredibly hard. But there's consultants out there. You just got to find somebody and work through it. There's more and more off-the-shelf programs these days, of course. Our business is very unusual, so we do things in ways that nobody else would do. But you have to engage with technology. That's all I can say, and you have to find the best people you possibly can to help you with that. And you almost can't spend too much. It's actually more effective technology that it can improve your systems and your customer service is more effective than doing extra advertising, for example. You've just got to have got great systems in place, and it's very tough. I wouldn't like to compete with me if I was starting off 1999 against a company like Jim's. I'd have no hope, but it was because everybody was on the same level then. But the kind of stuff that we do in Jim's, you couldn't do. Like, each franchisee every day lets us know how much work they need, which services they want to do, what suburbs they're prepared to offer that service in, which can vary, what time of day, when they can do it same day or in the future. There's all these things that we know. Now, we might have 40 franchisees in an area, only one of them can take the job, but we know who that is and we send it straight to them. It's technology like that, you couldn't afford it. In fact, when we started off Jim's, we didn't have, it was all paperwork. And somebody actually showed me they said, you're running at a loss. Your fees don't cover what you're doing. If we hadn't actually automated the system, then we would have failed. Now, our fees actually, in proportional terms, haven't risen at all, except with CPI since those days. But because we actually have improved the system so much and we're cutting our costs down, it's profitable and it's productive. IT is a very exciting area. It's the area where small businesses can challenge and defeat bigger ones. And you look at the big businesses of the current age, like Google and Amazon and Facebook and the rest, they're all started from nothing not too long ago. But even those ones, the shine's coming off them, they're actually dropping in value and there's new small businesses coming up. It's an amazing time to be in business because the small and the nimble have so many advantages. Like if we make a decision, like in Jim's, I will walk down to the office. I have usually a chat run down about 5:30 in the evenings, and I'll sit around and have a bit of a chat with Rocky and Joel if he's there, and we just discuss things. Then we'll come up with an idea. We'll do that. Bang, done. No bureaucracy, no lines of things. If we decide it, we do it. Cynthia gets involved, and we look at the costs and stuff, and we want her to agree to it and stuff. But it's really, really simple and informal. We do extraordinary number of things very quickly. Like, for example, we've just launched a registered training organization. That was just coming up with a conversation from late last year. Just a thing like that too. And we're looking at planning special weekends to bring our top franchisees back in to get extra support and training and so forth. We just discuss it. We work it out, figure out, just do it.
I think, Jim, the big corporates, they call it being agile is the terminology they use. I think Charles Darwin talked about the survival of the fittest, and many people, misinterpret that. He thought it meant being physically fit, whereas in fact what he meant was being adaptive. It was survival of the most adaptive in terms of his theory of evolution. And what I'm hearing from you here, particularly as a small team and, with a fully engaged founder owner, close to the customers, could we improve it this way? We could try that. Why don't we do it? That gets decided, as you say, a couple of conversations as opposed to potentially several months of work. The second thing that, that you mentioned there in terms of the ability to take on the big companies. Now, I remember some of my earlier companies, and we had to build the software from scratch and something to be able to show videos on the internet. Then YouTube turned up.
Yes.
And then we had to have a customer database, and we had to buy this software called Act and put it on a computer, and had to get an IT person to configure it and everything. And these days we can just go to HubSpot.com and use the basics for free. So the ability to use things that only big companies could afford in the past and to be able to rent them as you use them over the internet now does provide unparalleled opportunities for any type of business of any size to be able to quickly improve its processes, get information about how the business is going. And what we've found, we've worked with a few hundred business owners in the last 12 months. And one of the biggest gaps is not doing any research with customers, not actually understanding what their satisfaction is, what could have been done to improve it. So whereas from those earliest days, as you were making sure the grass was perfect, you were getting the direct feedback from those early customers, but you're now getting it from every customer, across, I think you said, was it how many thousand franchisees did you say?
4,600.
4,652. But like that's an enormous amount of information that's being collected. But yes, beyond that, you as the owner you're reading the complaints and you're having a look at them and determining if they're legit and ensuring it's
if there's a hard complaint, I will personally sit on it till it's fixed. There was about 2 this morning that I actually will be arranging refunds for the clients for various reasons, because that's just what you do. So I will personally sit on it, or I'll actually pass it back to the franchisor. And in an email, I'll tell the client, if you haven't got this sorted out by next Wednesday, 5 p.m., you contact me. And everybody knows what's going to happen if they don't fix it.
There's no doubt, Jim, that you are the farmer in Jim's group in terms of the shadow being the best fertilizer. But
the interesting thing about it, Bill, is I'm actually not good at doing very much. People like Bill and like Rocky and Cynthia and my wife who looks after accounts and Megan, people like that, and Karen who looks after our IT, they're all far, far, far more capable than I am in those particular areas. There's very limited things that I can do better than anyone else, but it's almost nothing. Talking to you is probably one of the very few examples.
But Albert's got a question around, back in those early days, Jim, did you have a daily routine? Did you set out with a number of hours you were going to sort of work a day? How did you deal with weekends? So we've got a lot of business owners, juggling all this stuff, right? Not enough time, working in the business, not on the business. Lots of complexity. When you started out, how did you grapple with all of that?
Well, I sort of did everything. I mean, in the beginning, I was answering phone calls and all kinds of stuff as needed. But look, the one great benefit I have is that I'm really not very good at doing very much. So I tend to find competent people to handle different areas so that I don't. And I have never believed. There's a saying that one of my favorite sayings is no other success can compensate for failure in the home. And I fervently believe in it. I have got 10 children, and I love my kids, and I've seen them growing up, and I have time for them. I don't think there's any compensation for neglecting your kids. And one of the most rewarding things about my position as a franchisor is when I talk to franchisees, when I ring my franchisees on key anniversaries, like when they be 10, 15, 20 years, this kind of thing. And one time recently, I was ringing one of my franchisees who on his 10-year anniversary, and I said, how'd you get into it? And what were you doing? And he said, well, I used to be a manager with IGA, and I worked really long hours. And he said, one morning I was about to leave for work very early in the morning, and my 4-year-old son had said to me, Daddy, I wish you could have breakfast with us. That's what he said to him. And he said he drove to work and his tears were streaming down his face, and then he quit and he bought a Jim's Mowing franchise. And he doesn't make any better money, but the same money he was making as a manager, but he's seen his children grow up. He's seen that 4-year-old turn into a 14-year-old. And I said, have you ever thanked him for making that? And he said, every day, because it's changed my life. See, the point of it is, this guy is not about to become a multi-millionaire, But what he wants is a decent living, and he wants to see his family grow up. And frankly, I consider that a person who's got a whole heap of money and has been a failure as a father or a mother is a failure in life. Nothing can compensate for that.
And Jim, at Small Business Australia, we, with our members and the broader small business community, one of the things about small business people, we keep hearing the politicians talk about the engine room of the economy and the providers of all the jobs, but much more important is the role business owners play in their local communities in terms of, providing the prizes for the school trivia night and coaching the kids, down at the netball club and those sorts of things. And that central benefit, if you can get a business that you are the master of rather than being the slave to, it gives you an enormous amount of additional flexibility over what many people that are wage and salary slaves don't have in various larger corporations and things, where you can have the flexibility, but you've got to invest time and effort and energy into getting the business to that level where it's working for you rather than you working for it.
You've got to trust people too. You've got to find people that you can trust. And sometimes I've been mistaken about and I've been ripped off. But generally speaking, if you find good people and you trust them to do their job, it empowers them.
Yep.
So you don't want to micromanage everything. You want to talk to people. You want to discuss it with them. What's going on? How can I help? What do we need? What resources do we need? But let people progress. One spending request I never refuse is any request for training of any kind that's remotely relevant to business. I want my staff to grow and to develop as individuals. And if you show that you trust them and you care about them, generally speaking, they will do the right thing by you.
So Jim, possibly the last question, I'll call out for any more, but it's around, is there one or two things that when a new franchisee, you're considering whether you're going to offer them the franchise, is there sort of one or two characteristics in particular that you're looking at for? I know that you mentioned earlier that, look, if you've worked in an environment that's sort of structured, e.g., say the military or, in a corporate where there's processes and things, because it's a system that you're going to be getting from us and implementing that system will make you a good franchisee. But beyond that, are there other things that you're looking for? You go, yeah, I really want to, that'd be a great franchisee. If it's going to work for them, I know that's going to work for us, that you sort of got your eye on, or your franchisors when they're out doing their recruiting?
Well, generally speaking, the more responsible your previous job's been, the better you'll tend to be. People who've had a background like sales or management or those kind of things tend to be hugely successful. One guy who's come up through McDonald's as a manager there, which is fantastic training. He's business turning over $800,000 a year very quickly. He's just an amazing guy, but he's learned to do that. Look, the biggest single thing to my mind is, and this is going to be an unfashionable word, but it's humility. It's being able to look at what you're doing and say, how can I do it better? And that's one thing that every day of my working life and every day of my non-working life, and that's Christmas, Easter, everything. I don't really like holidays very much, I must say. But I've asked myself the question, how can I do this better? What can we improve? And I ask myself again and again, from the time I was mowing lawns, how can I shave a half second going around a tree? How can I save one step emptying my grass bag? How can I travel more consistently? How can I delight my customers? How can I cut my costs? And I ask myself that question all the time. That is the characteristic attitude of a good operator. We have a system in gyms. We divide franchisees into gold and silver, bronze and lead. Gold and silver are people who are just naturally like that, who would just think, how can I improve? How can I do better? And they're the people who have an incredible success rate. They make one mistake and they'll never do it again. Bronze is the kind of person that's not naturally as good at business, but can be trained and helped to do better because they'll listen to you and you coach them and they'll get better and they learn and they grow. Lead is the kind of person that says, I'm nothing I cannot change. Everything that goes wrong is someone else's fault. It's the system's fault. It's the client's fault. It's the economy. It's you, Jim. It's my franchisor. Everybody else is at fault. And the problem with that is that you can't help them. And it doesn't mean that they're stupid. Sometimes they're quite smart people. They're incredibly articulate. They're good at explaining why it's not their fault that things keep on going wrong. But they won't listen. Yeah. That's the biggest thing I would say to anybody. You need to look at yourself all the time. People think they give great service in business, but so many of them just don't. They're clueless as to how bad they are. And you've got to be the kind of person that's humble enough to say, I made mistakes. And I've made so many mistakes in my life. You asked me before, at most, I could name about 50 really, really bad mistakes that I've made over the course of my business career, but I'm always aware of it. And I recognize that, okay, what did I do wrong? How can I avoid it happening in future? And you just got to be prepared to not be proud and say, I'm not perfect. None of us is perfect. We can all do better. And I talk about my mistakes often. I tell people about it so they won't get discouraged. Don't think because I'm so brilliant, you couldn't do it. No, if somebody as dumb as me could do it, then you can do it. Because honestly speaking, there's almost nobody who's not better at lots of things in business than I am.
Well, Jim, this is probably a great time to wrap it up, because Susie's just made a comment saying humility isn't unfashionable. It's critical and surprisingly impactful, certainly in the case of all of her careers. And I think all of us that are listening today and those that watch the replay, that's just totally oozed out your integrity, your humility, and your incredible generosity, Jim, in taking the time and sharing with us, key elements, of your journey, and the implications and the potential lessons for all of us that have been listening.